Hi everyone. Thought I would do a reading update for today, September 22nd, 2025. So let's get into it. So I finished a few books this week. So like I said last time, I'm reading some haunted house novels or supernatural horror novels, I guess, to expand it a little bit. But I read Hell House by Richard Matheson. And sorry to say, I was kind of disappointed with Hell House. It has a very similar premise to The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is one of my favorites. My old copy here of Haunting of Hill House, which the premise of you have a house with a troubled history, and you have four different characters spend a weekend or a couple days or a week at the house to try to unravel the mysteries of the house to see whether it's haunted or not. And that is the premise also of Hell House. So it's not necessarily a copy of the Jackson book. Matheson takes it in a somewhat more pulpier, grotesque direction to a certain extent with Hell House, where you have four characters, you have two mediums, and a husband and wife team of, I guess there's paranormal investigators of a sort, and they're commissioned to investigate this house that has a horrible history. This really awful man lived there who was wealthy and psychotic and held all sorts of grotesque parties and things like that, including murder. So there's like a real grim history to this house, and as soon as the characters come into this house, though, things quickly start to go wrong for them, and we see how the evil spirits in this house are attacking the insecurities of these people. The married couple kind of have their intimacy issues, and the book gets into that a little bit, where there's a bit of an age gap between the husband and the wife, and so the spirits are playing upon those. And then you have a medium, another woman who is a medium who is they don't know if she's a fraud or not, but some crazy things happen with her as well. And then there's another medium, a man who is a medium as well. I guess like with Matheson, I just felt the pacing of the book felt off, and these characters were not. Whereas Shirley Jackson, her characters have a lot of psychological complexity to them, and I felt like I never really got a good grasp on who these characters were necessarily. And usually Matheson, he tried to be a little bit edgier with his novel by including some I don't know if you call it graphic, but some, I don't know, some edgy material in the book, and it just didn't really work. It felt a little embarrassing, to be honest, at times, and yeah, so and I didn't really find it that scary either, although I guess a lot of people do, apparently. But yeah, I was a little kind of disappointed in this book, and it's yeah, yeah, and I'm a big fan of Matheson's short stories. Those are great, and his novels like the Shrinking Man and I Am Legend are really good novels. This just felt like he was trying to stretch a little bit on a somewhat tired premise, but kind of including some more, a little bit more intense material to it. It just didn't quite work. So those are my thoughts on Hell House. This is a nonfiction book I read, The Instability of Truth by Rebecca Lemov. I mentioned this last time. And this book, it's a history of brainwashing and mind control, where the author, and she's a historian of science at Harvard University. So Yeah, and there's a lot of really good history in this book, but I felt like the book got almost too bogged down in the history sometimes, where we start out learning about Korean War, prisoners of war in the during the Korean War who famously were brainwashed by their captors, the Chinese communists who are running these experiments of breaking someone down psychologically and then kind of building them back up with a communist ideology. I get was the goal, and it was maybe like the one thing people, Americans anyway, remembered from the Korean War. These prisoners of war came back, and some of them chose to stay in China because they had fully converted over to the communist cause. And there was a lot of media attention on that, and the methods used by the Chinese, to convert the world to communism, which Mao said it was the equivalent to a spiritual atomic bomb. Our methods of converting people to our ideology, but that the methods though were modified through time, where later, like, scientists and psychologists became really fascinated with the techniques used on these prisoners, and government agencies like the CIA and universities got involved with researching mind control and how you can control someone's behavior, take away their individuality, and things like that. And the main premise of the book is that if you put someone in isolation, if you you can easily take away their identity by forcing ideas on them coercively, whether psychologically or physically, and there's been so much done on that as far as bending people towards whatever it is. And then we get into chapters on cults in the 60s and 70s, and how they applied methods of brainwashing to get people onto their beliefs. And maybe I'm just kind of getting tired of reading about cults at this point, and the methods they've used to convert normal middle class kids, or supposedly normal middle class kids, and to suddenly get them want to join some charismatic guru or hippie or whatever in the forest and completely give up their identity for this person. So I think a lot of the techniques used by cult leaders, I mean, there's been so much written on that and how easily people can fall into it. I guess it just gets kind of depressing reading about that, and how someone can lose their individuality. And there's a chapter on the Patty Hearst case, the Harris of the Hearst family, who was kidnapped as she was very young, like 19 or 20, by a radical revolutionary group, and they applied methods of brainwashing on her, isolating her, depriving her of things, using violence, physical violence, psychological violence, and then pushing, once again, a radical ideology on her. And then it was a big scandal in the 70s, and then later she was helping them on bank robberies and things like that. And then there was a big public debate about, was she brainwashed, or was she actually a willing participant? And the author gets into how the public didn't really fully understand how brainwashing worked and the methods used. So like I said, the Patty Hearst case has been written about at length as well. I've never done got into the whole literature of the Patty Hearst case, but that was a big thing in the 70s, and a very famous case. And then we get into kind of, there's a chapter on surgery, brain modification, how in the 60s and 70s there were brain surgeons, neurologists who were into the idea of how do we solve the problem of violence, and possibly using brain modification surgeries or putting electrodes into people's brains, and some more far out stuff. And it is interesting and crazy what they were doing. And then we get the last part of the book gets into how social media tech companies are applying these techniques on social media to bend people to think certain ways through algorithms and doom scrolling, and really manipulating, messing with people's minds on social media. And I think anyone watching this, we've all experienced that or have witnessed that, of someone who is just kind of, a apathetic person, or just kind of one day, and then after a few weeks on social media, they're raving about stuff. But I think that's an extreme case, but I think it can affect all of us. I mean, being influenced, just controlling our moods, whether the news is horrible and it's making us feel awful, what we're reading on social media, or angry, or any of these things. I wish there had been a little bit more on that actually in the book. I think maybe it was a bit overpacked, overstuffed with all the history, and I think it would have been interesting to focus a little bit more on how these tech companies, big data, and all this are being used to not just for political reasons, but consumer reasons and all sorts of corporate agendas. That's really one of the I think one of the big problems of our time. And so ultimately some interesting history in here, but I was hoping for something a little bit more on where we're at now, instead of rehashing a lot of the past cases. So yeah, those are two library books I had. And let's see, my other big project talk about, I'm still going through The Power Broker. Made some pretty good progress on this week, where I'm up to page 327 now. And I do like these. I guess I'm just doing kind of dispatches each week on The Power Broker, but I'm getting to the part of the book now where Moses has started to accumulate a lot of power. He was head of the parks, responsible for park development in New York State in the 1920s, but also with building roads and parkways and everything. And he's really starting to flex his power by the end of the 1920s. And I think Caro refers to the summer of 1929 as when Robert Moses became this very well-known figure at the time, as all these beaches were opening on Long Island and the roads were opening up, and he's getting a lot of great press, and and his power and influence is increasing. And as I mentioned on previous videos, he was close to Al Smith, who was governor of New York, and really, of all people, Al Smith is really the one who gave Moses the ticket to power, because he allowed Moses to pursue his projects and his goals, and really gave him cover when anyone was not happy with the methods of Moses, which included, using all sorts of tactics to increase his power, whether it was through deception or legal battles, or sometimes just intimidation. Just a number of ways he could get what he wanted. And so it's interesting now. So we're getting into the Depression years, and Franklin Roosevelt enters the picture. Of course, FDR was elected governor of New York in 1928. And by this point, Moses was worried because his benefactor Smith was leaving politics. And FDR, who did not really get along with Moses, and he is now the governor. But what Caro lays out is that at this point, Moses had amassed enough power where the new governor, really could not afford to get rid of Moses, because it was much more beneficial to keep him on, even though FDR did not like his methods. And his Moses did a few things to really to annoy FDR. And we know from his private comments that Moses had a very low opinion of FDR. He didn't consider him to be up to his intelligence level. And also comments he made about, of course, FDR was stricken with polio by this time. And Moses privately seemed to think that a disabled person had no business being in politics at all. So we're really starting to see the super villain. I think we're going to get here with this historical figure coming out. And so he and FDR have a bit of a détente when FDR is governor, because Moses is continuing to pursue his parks and his roads projects, solidifying his power, and FDR, meanwhile, as governor, has to deal with the Great Depression and dealing with that. But he's also becoming a national figure at this point, Franklin Roosevelt, and who many believe will be the presidential candidate of 1932, and that too. Like, there's even an incident Caro talks about where Moses physically attacked someone at one point and possibly tried to kill him. Now, granted, what was said to Moses was awful, but he talks about FDR looking the other way when that incident happened, and so. Yeah, and we also get to see with Moses how his classism and racism were starting to come out. For instance, when he's building his parkways into Long Island, there are a lot of wealthy people in Long Island, owned a lot of land, okay, and he had to battle with these people sometimes to get permission to build roads through there. And he made a compromise where there was some wealthy families who refused to give up their land. So Moses made the highway kind of crooked and diverted it, where rather than a straightaway road where it would be the most efficient route, he cut corners, which in the long run would force motorists to drive 30, 40 extra miles that they didn't have to, just to cater to the wealthy of Long Island. So things like that, and also Moses also starting to discourage black people in New York City to not go to the beaches as well, and doing all sorts of things to kind of enforce a segregation on the beaches of Long Island too. So, and Caro is getting into that. So, like I said, we're starting to get where his power is really starting to increase and is starting to really change the state of New York. But he's also becoming a national figure and even an international figure, where city developers from around the world were coming to New York City and were observing what Moses was doing with his modern parkways and his parks that he was developing. So he's influencing everybody. He's really influencing the course of urban development as we move through the 20th century. So yeah, I'm up to the Great Depression right now, when Franklin Roosevelt is dealing with that, and Caro is giving us this detailed picture of New York City and how corrupt the city politics of New York City were during the Depression, and the horrible condition that people were living in the city as well. So we're getting this a really detailed portrait of that time in history too. So so those are the books I've read and have been reading, and yep, thanks for watching. If you have any comments about any of these books or anything, I'd be happy to hear them. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.